is the policy subcommittee meeting for the public schools of Brookline for March 30th, 2020. So let's see, do we have, Robin, we do have a set of minutes that we need to vote on, correct?
That's correct. We have minutes from the February 10th meeting that were distributed.
Okay. Okay, and I believe everybody has a copy of those minutes. So if it's okay with folks, I will move those minutes. Can I get a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
No.
Okay, then I will, we will do a roll call vote. Dr. Abramowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Monopoly?
Yes.
Mr. Perlman?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Those pass unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is revised field trip policy. As folks may remember, we took a draft of the field trip policy to first reading a few weeks ago, and some comments came back primarily related to inserting language about students not being denied opportunities based on their inability to pay. And so I went back, as all of you have seen, and I sort of made some changes. And I just wanted to sort of hear from this group as to whether there were any comments or thoughts on any of those changes.
I support changes that enable student participation regardless of ability to pay. Jennifer, this would fall under the category of one of those unfunded mandates that we're creating. So we may need to have a conversation about how to ensure that finances are available for students who cannot pay, so that this does not result in the closure or restriction of opportunities, and instead sort of increases our inclusion of students in existing opportunities. I don't know if that's a procedures issue or if that needs to get bumped over to finance, but it seems like sound policy.
Yeah, I do think it's a policy related issue because there will be budgetary implications for this, although I'm not sure how much different it will be versus what is happening in practice now. Maybe Nicole or Mary Ellen could probably speak better to that, about what that would look like and whether or not it would be really any change in practice from what we're doing now. I also don't know, are we stipulating what kinds of trips these are, or are we leaving this just at day trips, or are we just not specifying?
No, we
So
there is language on the field trip forms itself that says explain how students who have financial hardship will have access to this trip, and usually that's through fundraisers or something to that effect. We do not have a practice by which the district pays towards trips for students, but it's more incumbent on whoever is running the trip to do fundraisers to make that happen for students.
So it is an issue, and I think it's a valid issue. It's one that I raised at the full school committee meeting, but the sense from the school committee at large seemed to be that that's the policy on field trips shouldn't necessarily be impacted by that issue, and that issue should be dealt with outside of the policy on field trips. That's not to say that I'm suggesting that we not discuss it, but that seemed to be the direction of the majority of the school committee from the meeting. So whether it's an issue that needs to be dealt with through finance, or whether it's an issue that proponents of field trips need to be sort of more fully apprised of, and make sure that that they're engaging in the necessary fundraising. I'm not sure, but it is something that's going to need to be addressed.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say that I support, I mean, I'd be ready to vote on, revised language that includes this policy with full understanding that this is going to create some sort of financial obligations for the district or for the schools in terms of, procedures and possibly appropriation. So I don't know if we want to make our decision about this conditional on sort of the okay from other subcommittees, or if we want to go ahead and bring this back to the full committee, but or if we just want to go ahead and say, this looks like good policy to us. Sometimes good policy comes with appropriations recommendations, and if the school committee as a whole decides to support this, then we accept the responsibilities about what there will need to be some work done on the schools side, on PSB side, to figure out what the financial and procedural implications of this are going to be. And I would just say, I really want to emphasize, there was previous language that basically said that if there was not a balance of students from different socioeconomic and other kinds of diversity backgrounds, that we would not have field trips. I do not want to foreclose the opportunity to have field trips. So I think that the bias, the burden needs to be on the PSB and the administration to enable field trips through fulfillment of this policy. But I don't know, I don't really know how this is going to work. I mean, is there going to be means testing? Is this going to be a voluntary situation? I mean, because some of the field trips that go on are expensive, and some of them are non-academic. And so I just don't know. I don't think it matters, but.
Well, I think there are two ways. I wouldn't necessarily presume that a majority of the school committee would say that that's going to become that ensuring that that students have the ability to go on a trip is going to be the financial responsibility of the district. I don't know if people are going to go there. It could be just that folks need to raise more money or they don't go on the trip. That could be the decision of the majority of the school committee. I'm not saying that that's my opinion as to how it should work necessarily. I'm just saying I'm not convinced that people are going to say this becomes something that the administration must fund. That's not necessarily how the financial assistance policies are set up. I don't believe. But nevertheless, I mean, if this is so, my point being is that there's more than one way to address this issue, and one of it might be that if people can't raise enough money, that the trips don't happen.
The financial assistance policy does not include field trips in the sense of, I think what the financial assistance policy does is supports day trips and not necessarily long, some of the international trips that we have. And as far as the language around diversity and determining whether or not a trip takes place based on diversity, I think if we were to say that the diversity of the trip should reflect the diversity of the club or the course that is sponsoring the trip, is probably a better approach to that, because I think we have trips that happen based on, whatever activity you're involved in. And if the activity is not diverse, the trip's not going to be diverse. And so I think to put that burden on the recruitment efforts that seem kind of artificial and are not a natural course of what's happening for a trip or a club doesn't make a lot of sense.
That's fair. I would note that that piece is not necessarily a mandate. It's just that reasonable efforts need to be made. Although I do think that's still that's a good point. If it's a trip for a music trip, for example, and the folks who participate in that particular type of music activity, they are who they are, right? And if they don't necessarily reflect the diversity of the entire student population, that's probably, it's probably too much to ask even people to make reasonable efforts to, or maybe it's not, I don't know, to make reasonable efforts to try to diversify that group before going on this trip. Not to say that they shouldn't try to diversify that group as an ongoing matter, but to have some sort of requirement placed on them before going on any trip in a given year. That's a fair point and a fair question. So maybe this language should be modified a bit. To sort of better reflect that. And just so go ahead, Sharon, if that was Sharon.
That was Jennifer. So this is Jennifer. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting you can't see us. So I just wanted to go back to the point about, we determine what we think the policy should be, and then the district or a school committee can talk some more about what that might look like for implementation or procedures, whether or not that's fundraising for international trips or looking at the financial assistance policy. I think that we put forward the policy that we think is the best in the best interest of our students. I don't know that we're going to have all those answers before, in order to determine the policy. That's one thought. And then I guess I feel like I'm always bringing up, I really think that I would be interested in, I'm not on finance, but as a member of the school committee, looking at how we determine or what are the parameters and guidelines for financial assistance, and how do we support families who may fall just outside that window. Just to be mindful of that when we're doing fundraising trips or looking at student attendance on trips. So I don't know if we need to have all the answers about how the logistics of all of it will work, but I do think that it probably makes sense to look at the language for membership on trips or diversity of students on trips to reflect the group. And I also think it would be great if groups were looking to make their groups diverse from the get-go and not just when they're looking to set trips for their groups.
I do share Michael's concern, though, that we want to be careful to avoid a situation where we are canceling a trip for the vast majority of people who could do it based on a financial shortfall that we have not addressed in advance, especially if we can anticipate it. Because there might be situations where we're not able to sufficiently fundraise, and does that mean we don't do the trip at all? And maybe that's fine, that's a value judgment, but I think we need to be fully conscious and aware of the consequences of the policies that we set forth when we don't necessarily understand all the ramifications.
What would your recommendation? Yeah, I hear you. What would your recommendation be as a next step, David?
Well, I think we should perhaps look at this in concert with the financial assistance policy to see exactly whether that would cover students who are in this position for international and or overnight trips. And perhaps that policy is sufficient to provide that extra safety valve we're looking for. Maybe it's not. If it's not, then perhaps we would want to adjust that policy as well.
I don't think, and I don't have it in front of me, Mary Ellen or Nicole, I don't think the financial assistance policy is really going to, I don't think it gets us to this issue.
Michael, I just want to let you know, Mary Ellen's not on the call. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. No, that's okay. But we can certainly look at the financial assistance policy. Another piece of this has made me sort of, Sharon's comments, as I was thinking about them a little bit more, made me wonder if we need to, if it is our intention to say that this policy is not intended to create a financial obligation of the district to fund student trips, whether we should say that. So, because I do wonder, as Sharon was speaking, that whether we're implying that the district will pick up the tab. Any thoughts on that? Or
Sharon, are you talking? Because we can't hear you.
If that language is customary for policies, I'm fine with that. It sounds more contractual than policy, honestly. You know, yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that many kinds of like clauses in other policies that we have. So it seems like a little
Well,
bit of
we
a
have-
misfit, but
well, we have language in the same policy that makes it very clear that if a trip gets canceled, the PSB is not responsible for repaying any money. I'm not sure this is that far afield from a sort of a structural perspective than that clause is, which is a fairly customary policy in all of these field trip policies, in a lot of the field trip policies that we've looked at from other districts. So I don't think it's a misfit. I think it's just a question of whether we think it's the right, whether it's what we intend or not. If people feel that it should be our intention that that the district pick up the tab for folks who can't pay it, if fundraising proves inadequate, then we should be clear about that.
Right, I agree with you, Michael, but that does broaden the discussion somewhat to whether we want to have a budget available in order to do that. And then also in making that determination, I would want to know what are the shortfalls that we face now? How often does this come up as an issue? And what does that amount look like? And is that something we could fund? Because if it does seem like it's manageable based on past experience, then that might lean us in one particular direction. And if not, then it might lean us in another direction. Nicole, do you have that information in terms of how much money is usually requested?
Because the policy, the financial assistance policy does not include trips, nobody even applies. I have not heard from any teachers that certain kids can't go because of the expense. And so I think they've just been managing that. But there might be a different answer if the financial assistance policy did address field trips. I just don't, because that's not the practice now. I don't have that information. So yeah, I'll stop there.
All right, so we've got that issue that maybe we need to do a little bit more homework on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Nicole.
The thing that I think we do need to keep in mind and keep a budget or something for is when we have, like for instance, a couple of years ago, we had some folks, I think they were in Tanzania, and a teacher was hospitalized because she got ill and something else happened. I think we need to think about a budget for those things if we're thinking about budgeting for field trips. If a student got sick one time and wasn't able to come back and flights had to be changed, and the expectation that, at least a chaperone might have to change their flight if a child is sick, may have to stay in a hotel longer, or that kind of thing, that shouldn't have to come out of the pockets of the chaperone, or might not be affordable for a family to take on that expense. That is something that I think we need to think about as far as financially supporting field trips.
aren't those travel insurance issues?
That brings me to the other part of this, is that we should mandate travel insurance. I'm finding out in this crisis now that not all of the trips are planned with travel insurance. So we definitely need to think about that, including that policy.
Do we know what other districts do in terms of travel insurance? Is it something that's typically required?
I don't know. I can look into that. I just know right now we have some trips that are not happening and don't have, there was one for sure that was planned with insurance. The trip to Japan, I think they had insurance, so the cancellation wasn't a problem. And then we had some other trips on deck that are not going to happen that we're now in a like, people individually selected to get insurance. So some folks will get their money back and some will not. And so I think that's something we should probably look into.
Let me add to this in terms of why it makes sense to have in the policy. Which the difference between those two trips that Nicole's talking about was the trip leader, the staff member, PSP staff member, on one trip required travel insurance of all the student travelers. Okay, and the other one, the trip leader didn't require it, but it was a trip leader's discretion. Okay, and because of that, there's some very significant complications right now with one of the providers. So I really, whether this is policy procedure, okay, but we really should not have that on a chaperone level, that decision. It creates too many complications, whether it's safety, whether it's health, whether it's, and then opens up the travelers and the chaperones and us. There's too many complications that can't easily be dealt with from afar.
Yeah, right, and you got to the point that I was thinking about is whether it's a policy issue or a procedural issue, but it may be important enough where it's a policy issue. Is it, if it's not in a policy, you could certainly develop a procedure that says this needs to happen. But I do recognize that some things are difficult to make happen if they're not enshrined in policy. So is it your view that this is at the level that it needs to be in the policy?
Mixed on that, honestly. But when we have to, let me put it this way. If you guys don't put it in the policy, we'll definitely put it in the procedures. We have to at this point.
I think putting it in policy would be important.
Okay, what do others feel about that? Or do they not have an opinion?
I think it should be in the policy ideally. If we want to mandate insurance, then we need to have that written down somewhere.
Okay, I don't feel that strongly one way or the other. I'm fine with including that in the policy if we feel it's substantial enough where it needs to be there.
I don't have an opinion one way or the other.
Okay, and sort of we sort of skated by the first issue that Nicole sort of raised. It's this kind of we have a requirement in this draft policy for an emergency crisis plan that doesn't necessarily deal with costs associated with reacting to a crisis, which I think is where you were going, Nicole.
Sorry, correct.
Yeah. So I don't. So is that part of? So how would that work? I guess in practice, I'm just trying to envision it. Somebody wants to go on a trip to Tanzania. They've got all the money for the plane tickets. They've got all the money for the hotels and whatever else they're doing on the itinerary. If they need a medical removal, would that just be additional insurance, or do you want funds set aside? How ideally should that work?
I think we should have. Ideally, an insurance policy would cover that, like not just trip cancellation in coverage, but like full insurance that includes medical or whatever. My concern is that that in some instances, insurance doesn't cover everything that needs to happen, and then somebody's still. Well, I'm not even sure what that looks like because we haven't really had that so far. But I can see where we've had incidents over the years since I've been here that makes me go like, oh, this could potentially be problematic and be very expensive. And so we should think about how to address those things. And I know in the case where the student was ill and not able to travel back, the parent had the resources to be able to go to fly to where the child was and be there and stay there, and that ended up being on the family's expense. But if we're in a situation where a family couldn't necessarily afford to buy a plane ticket same day, jump on a flight, that could have potentially been something where a family wouldn't have been able to respond in that way.
Right. So it sounds like we need, or my instinct is that we need some kind of insurance analysis to understand what we think we need. Whether it's, covering just cancellation or cancellation plus, medical costs that might be incurred in, outside of the country or on a trip. And maybe it may be a conversation that Mary Ellen needs to have with I don't know who the district's risk manager is, or insurance provider, to sort of understand what we think we need and what is available.
Yeah, that may be, that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, because I'm not knowledgeable enough about it. I know, not to discredit anyone, I don't think any of us on this call are knowledgeable enough about insurance products to really know what's available and what's reasonable and the costs associated with them and whatnot.
Agreed.
So let me do this. Let me follow up with Mary Ellen on this issue. To try and get a little bit of clarity about what we think we want to mandate. Okay.
Sure. People are nodding their heads, but you can't see us, so.
Yeah, I know. Sorry about that. But that's good to hear that people are nodding their heads. So, okay, so we'll do that. I'll also talk to Mary Ellen about, have another conversation about, financial assistance, understanding where, whether we've run into this issue before, get some clarity about what financial assistance can cover, should cover. I could also sort of modify the diversity language to sort of make it a little bit less onerous, and maybe a bit more group specific. And I'll just have to come back to this group on this.
Okay.
Michael, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
It's Jennifer. I was just wondering if, as chair, you had gotten any feedback on this policy, because I believe we put it out for some public comment, if I'm not mistaken, through a previous school committee meeting. Have you gotten any feedback from the public on this particular policy at all?
I don't believe we have. Is that right, Ms. Coyne?
That's correct. Didn't get any emails regarding that or comments.
I was just wondering if there were any other issues that had been highlighted by members of the community that we hadn't, fully addressed. So, thank you.
No, it's a fair question. Yeah, no, thank you for asking that, just to double check on that. Let's see, the next thing on the agenda is we wanted to sort of circle back on our conversation from last time about school councils and school council policy. Suzanne, Ben's on the phone. Suzanne, after the last meeting, said she was going to have a conversation with Ben, but he's here to talk to us about school councils. Sharon, you sent us what looked like draft, and I'm sorry, I have not had a chance to look through them all the way. Looks like a set of draft procedures. Is that right?
I didn't see those.
Sorry, Michael. We sent Robin sent something out that we've been working on. Is that what you're referring to?
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, I attributed those procedures.
Okay.
So, Ben, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think
on
so.
this? I don't know if any members are. Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Let me just tell you, what's in front of you basically, and sort of its genesis. So, as I mentioned, I don't know, a while ago, maybe end of January, that we are working on draft procedures for school council to make sure that school councils and principals obviously were getting clear guidance that was in alignment with both state law and school committee policy. So we developed a first draft, which we shared with principals, and got a lot of input from them in terms of wanting further clarity in a few areas. Essentially what you have here is you have the very beginning is sort of the most salient excerpts from both school committee policy and state law about the sort of intent of the school councils, that they are advisory and are making recommendations to the principal. Then we define membership pretty clearly. It's based on PSB policy, which is of course informed by state law. We get into the first roles and membership, then responsibilities. We define responsibilities, first taking the list from 1 through 5, I believe, are straight from state law, and number 6 is from PSB school committee policy. And then we further add further detail on those roles. Again, we cite if you see number 2 superscript, it's taken directly from state law. School committee policy. And if you see a number 1 superscript in any notes here, it's taken from state law. Then we get into school improvement plans. That's actually taken from the state guidelines. And then identify a few sort of meeting procedures, and then close with open meeting law and suggested procedures on communication. So again, it's it's trying to just be clear with folks about what they should, how they should do everything from when they should elect members, who should be identified to be on school council, what the role of the co-chair is, who's working with the principal, and then what their general responsibilities are. So let me just pause there. So that's what we have, and I think 2 more steps would be helpful, which is to get feedback from this body, and then probably get out to school committee, maybe get out to school councils as well. But really the relevant factors here are school committee policy and the state regulations and law.
Okay. Anybody on the subcommittee have any thoughts, questions, concerns?
I have a question. This is Jennifer. Ben, maybe you could help me just understand one piece. It's on page 3 of the document, elements of the annual school improvement plan.
Yep.
And what I was looking for was how school improvement plans decide on their goals and the number of the goals, and what are those limits. And I feel like that would go in this part here, and I didn't see it. And I was wondering if you could just speak to that and clarify that for me so I could understand it.
Yep. I'm just going to add a note to myself here. I think it's a good question. I know we have had in the past, about, I don't know, 4 years ago maybe, based on requests from the principals, we worked with them. We meaning Andrew and his staff, and work with principals to develop a template, which they've been using for the last 3 years at least. And those, I think, were 2-year, setting out 2-year goals. And we agreed upon, sort of general areas of what those goals should be on. And so that's what we're doing right now. We can certainly shift that. But you're right that at this point, it has really what the state lays out as what should be the elements. It doesn't have a process for developing that. And so, we could, a lot of these things, the question is we could leave it up to schools and have that autonomy here. You know, the coherence can be in these procedures, and then specific areas like actual development of the annual school improvement plan could be up to the schools. But you know, that's just a question we need to answer. But you're right, that's not there right now.
May I make a comment? I have
Yeah.
concerns that the opening of the document is inconsistent with the spirit and the letter of the policy manual, specifically section B, number 1. In the third paragraph, it stipulates that the principal of each school, in consultation with the school council established, shall adopt educational goals for the schools. I think that the language shall assist and make recommendations to the principal is a substantial deviation from that spirit, especially where it's located in the document. I think that it actually
I'm
subordinates.
sorry, Sharon, could you repeat that whole section again, please? That'd just be helpful.
Section B, number 1. I'm happy to put it in the chat box.
Sure, that'd be helpful.
It doesn't actually copy very easily, so I will do what I can. All right, my computer has frozen trying to do this because here you go. Moreover, it stipulates that the where are we? There is some, I'm sorry, I'm looking through the various documents. I apologize. I think that I have a concern in this document because the document does not clearly advise that the school improvement plan will be, that each school improvement plan will be presented to the school committee, which is actually stipulated in section B. Again, I am very sorry, the browser is moving very slowly. Under school councils, it says under school committee that the school committees will review and accept an annual school improvement plan for each school in the district. And I think that that should be captured here. There is also language in the policy manual around school council professional development that will enable school council members to have the knowledge and skills required to provide effective educational leadership. Let me see. And then there's something in here on voting that I can't find it. Something about, you said something that they shall not vote. Votes are not appropriate. The formation of consensus on a particular item would be helpful to the principal. And then you cite PSB school committee policy. What PSB school committee policy says that we would discourage voting on school councils?
So,
anyway, just there's a few other items in there.
We should be able to see my screen here, and on decision making right here. I mean, this is literally a quote from the school committee policy, which you should be able to see, and it reads: the school council by law are to assist and make recommendations to the principal. Votes are not appropriate. The formation of consensus of particular items would be helpful to the principal. So we were just actually putting word for word what's actually in the policy there on a specific question.
Okay, so let me clarify that the policy in other parts of the policy goes back and forth between the school, and maybe this requires a revision of the policy itself, but the policy goes back and forth between sort of really treating the school council as a substantive partner to the principal in the development and approval of the SIP and an approval of the budgets. And then periodically, I think sort of in the spirit of trying to promote cooperation, right, and not competition, it sort of devolves to just a reminder here, like, you know, we would like there to be consensus, but the procedures document sort of diminishes the role, the like sort of substantive, like kind of co-equal role that it has as in an advisory capacity in a number of specific ways. And then it uses language that I think is overly restrictive around votes because sometimes consensus is not going to be possible. And then I think that there's some language around sort of how the school council and the products of the school council's work fit into overall operations for the entire district that I think are really essential, having to do with, for example, the need for professional development of the school council, the need for the school committee to be engaged in review processes of the school council's work products, which is essentially the SIPs and the school budgets. And so like some of these things are just not being captured here. And so I'll just go back to my original statement, which is while I think that there is some sound, reflections here, it does seem to be a little bit cherry picked. It seems a little skewed. I don't, that's not the right word. I'm sorry, I'm very tired, but like it seems skewed towards a particular framing of the school council as being a subordinate and advisory body rather than in a significant body in governance. And it is very true that in Massachusetts law, it is a substantive body in governance.
I think folks might want to look, more. I think I'm sharing. Sorry, I'm scrolling. I realize that you're actually seeing my screen. I guess I don't really see where some of the things you're talking about are in the policy, like professional development. I could just be missing it, but I don't see.
No, I actually had the same. Ben, I had the same question. I wasn't sure where it was either.
Yeah, I don't actually see anything like that in the policy here. I'm happy to know it is. Like I said, I certainly could have missed it. We could have missed it while we were developing this.
Provide and encourage for school council professional development, page B22.
B22. I guess are we looking at the same policy?
I'm looking at the policy manual on the school website. I'm looking at the entire policy manual, and B22 is the page number that's in the policy manual. In the middle of the page, it says school councils provide and encourage resources for school council professional development. This is the responsibility of the school committee to the school councils, right? Which implies that there should be, like, honestly, I want to say, like, it would probably be helpful if you just control F'd the word council in the entire manual,
Right,
so that you could see all of the references to school councils outside of the limited 2 pages of the school council policy.
Right, but that section doesn't, that section, right? Yeah, that section that you're talking about, Sharon, does it necessarily, it sort of talks about providing professional development opportunities to school council members, but it doesn't necessarily get into the function of school council, right?
No, but these are school council procedures, and school council procedures presumably should involve the professional development of the school councils.
So I'll just jump in here while people are looking through the documents and say, I mean, it does make sense, I think, to make sure that our school council members, especially newly elected members, have some sort of training or access to information to understand their roles and responsibilities. I mean, I think that seems reasonable. We could include that as part of like onboarding for new members. I mean, that could even be, an online little webinar training pre-recorded. I mean, I think it could be straightforward, but just so we can make sure that everybody understands what it is that is in the purview of school council, what are the roles and responsibilities of school council. I think that sounds reasonable. And I want to, while I have a minute, just sort of jump in on 2 things I've been hearing go around. So one is a mention of the SIPs coming to school committee, which was Ben, it was in somewhere in your document, I think I saw that you had put that the SIPs should come to school committee. And I wanted to make a recommendation that I think it should come to the full school committee. I feel like in the past it's come to Curriculum Subcommittee in years past. We haven't done that this year, and I wasn't on it last year, but I did go to some of the site council meetings. But it wasn't, it was more of like a report as opposed to, it was just a small group. And I think that because there's curriculum and there's finance issues, if we're talking about the SIP goals having budgetary implications and working together, that it might make sense, instead of having those SIPs to go to curriculum and finance, to just come to full school committee is what I've been thinking. And the other thing was talking about the SIP goals. And I I am inclined myself to think that it would be good for them to be school-based. Schools could have choice. We may have, ideas about things we want to work on as a district, but school improvement plans, I think, could be specific to those schools. So that's just my thinking. So I'm just giving feedback about where I'm at.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to I also just again want to emphasize the importance of making sure that our procedures are aligned with the spirit of the school councils, right? Which, like, for example, in the introduction is for ensuring parity among staff and students, for seeking diversity and community representation, and for promoting a climate of participatory involvement and decision making within each school council. And so I think that at a couple of locations throughout the document, for example, under the budget review section, like, these responsibilities maybe come from the policy manual, but taken out of the context of the policy manual, they're very restrictive. So for example, on the second page, like where it says, review of the school budget, one could interpret this as being the total scope of responsibilities that the school council has for the school budget. And that is just to read through documents that describe the school budget in order to understand implications for items in the school improvement plan. And I support Jennifer's statement that the school improvement plan should be school derived, right? They should review the full school budget as provided by the district to the public and principal. That is not consistent with our current financial approach. We were trying to move towards school-based budgeting. So that probably is not consistent with where we're going to be in practice. And it would be overly restrictive in terms of the school council's ability to really provide any kind of consultation, or meaningful consultation rather. The school's council review should focus on whether the budget reflects the goals of the school improvement plan. Once again, if the school improvement plan is not being derived by the school council, then basically all that they're doing is participating in a very tokenistic validation exercise that says, here is the budget from the district, here is the SIPs from the district, and yes, we see that they go together and we really have no control over this, which is what we're hearing from school council members. And then, yeah, I mean, it feels like the way in which that this is drafted is highly, highly restrictive. And I'm not comfortable. I can't support this procedure. I can't support these procedures as an interpretation of the, much more substantive and, collaborative approach to school councils that's reflected in our policy and in the law.
David, did you want to add anything? We haven't heard anything from you.
I also share your thoughts, Jennifer, about emphasizing the importance of a school-based approach and review. I do see some of that in this draft where it talks about on page 2, I believe, school council responsibilities, adopting education goals for the school, identifying the educational needs of students attending the school. So I think those elements are good, but I would want that to be clear about the overall budget review, because there are certainly aspects in the district budget that have an impact on the school-based budget. And I think understanding that interplay and relationship would be important. So I wouldn't want that process to be a rubber stamp.
In terms of the budget review, the language there was intended to make sure that the principals asked for clarity on. I mean, the context here is that we're shifting the budget, development towards the schools, right? And so what we're trying to get is if you say last year or the year before or prior years, the school budget, quote unquote, was the sort of discretionary, very limited amount of discretionary money that the principals actually had control over. Okay, and now we're moving towards where they see their whole entire budget. They have some, more authority over, staffing and whatnot to make choices that support their school, their school goals. So that actually, in terms of the budget, wasn't meant to be restrictive, but it was meant to make sure that, however, at the time the district was putting together a school budget, that the school council saw that full piece, not just a component of it. So I think we probably changed the language there, but just wanted to make sure people understood that the intention there was that would get whatever a principal saw, whatever a principal was dealing with in terms of their budget, their full budget.
I also would like to say that, I hear what you're saying, Ben, but I'm concerned about the fact that the input that you've received is from principals and not from school council members, right? Who would have a different perspective about the information that needs, about sort of the way, about the responsibilities that perhaps need to be, included in here as a procedural issue, is sort of, and actually, frankly, who would have more information about the entire sort of logistical process of everything from elections to decision making to consultation with the wider school membership, and like they haven't had any input on this document whatsoever. I also want to mention that that we have language in our policy manual that emphasizes the fact that beyond the limitations, beyond the initial parameters that are presented in the in our policy manual, school councils can in fact have their scope and responsibilities expanded to the extent determined by the school committee in matters related to educational policy. And so specifically, and I've copied this into the chat box, on page C5 under general school administration school council policy, first page, it says the second sentence, wait, where it is, I'm sorry, did I copy the wrong thing? I'm sorry. In addition, the law states, here you go. In addition, the law states that nothing contained in this section shall prevent the school committee from granting a school council additional authority in the area of educational policy, provided, however, that school council shall have no authority over matters which are subject to Chapter 150 of the general laws, right? So my concern about the scope of this procedures document is that it is excessively restrictive in terms of, providing information to school council members about, what the structures are that they're operating in, professional development, their responsibilities vis-a-vis the budget, their responsibilities vis-a-vis the SIPs, their responsibilities vis-a-vis, the capacity for the scope of their responsibilities to be responded to the school committee, the nature of their relationship to the school committee, and sort of like the spirit of representation that they're supposed to be bringing to the work. There's like one of the biggest things that they're supposed to be doing, outside of decision making, right, in terms of like school council responsibilities, is they're supposed to be kind of representing the will and the culture and the desires of the community, in educational priority, like school level educational priority setting, or school level educational policy and school level educational like budgeting. And I don't see that that is just well represented here when it seems to me to be pretty clear from the policy document.
I think we can have a difference.
I don't think, Sharon, I think you're reading more into the policy document than is there. I mean, I think a discussion can be had as to what authority the school committee, not necessarily the superintendent, wants to give to school councils. But I don't think the language that you indicated actually provides for that. It just states what the law doesn't restrict the school committee from doing that. Whether the school committee wants to do that is a different question. And I think Ben would not be following the will of the school committee if he sort of decided on his own, outside of the school committee, what would be delegated and what wouldn't, in terms of in the area of educational policy or anything else. I mean, I think we can talk about that, but I think Ben, my guess is Ben was following what the policy actually says, not necessarily trying to be more expansive than what's on the page in the policy.
So I disagree. I think that, I'm sort of citing, all the way through here, language from our policy manual that just is more expansive than what's represented in these procedures, and I want to highlight the fact, that it seems really clear here that there's no feedback from actual school council members here, either teachers or parents or community members, to inform how it is that those individuals, see their role and see their needed role to be. And I think that that's a real limitation of the existing document. I mean, listen, we can go ahead and you can go ahead and institute this procedural document, but I mean, I'm going to do everything I can to overturn it in the course of the next 2 years of my tenure here. Like I don't think that this is what we want our school councils to look like. I'm also concerned about, some of the procedural decisions that have been made, like, for example, decide upfront the number and schedule of meetings. First meeting must take place no later than 40 days after the opening of school. We should have a standard set of meetings. Those meetings should happen absolutely within the first 30 days of, the school year, because we are already well underway in the context of our budgeting process, right? Those active budgetary conversations are already happening and people need to kind of get on board and know what's going on. And then, there needs to be, there really should be like some accountabilities that are built in here. Like, who is responsible for making sure that there are, I think that there should be monthly meetings. I think that those meetings should start in September so that school council members can take active place in the actual annual budget cycle. I think that we need to have a clear understanding of when the schedule is so that we can provide, appropriate professional development training. And I think that we need to have a clear agreement around like when elections need to be,
Sharon, can I just ask a question? So the procedures here, and maybe I haven't read them as closely as you have, but they do those things around meetings. Do they restrict the school councils from doing the things that because they sort of seem to set a baseline, but don't necessarily restrict, say, monthly meetings or meetings on the 10th day of school or any of those things.
I think that, I think from I think you are. I think from a policy perspective, we need to have a clear understanding of exactly what the function of school councils needs to be. And frankly, the functions of a school council that meets 4 times a year, maybe once,
so Sharon,
is very different.
Sharon. The language says school councils should meet no fewer than 4 times per year. So they can meet more than that under these procedures.
But there is a wide range of variation that creates in terms, it's not even an equity issue. It's a core governance issue. Then you're talking about fundamentally different levels of access to authority over educational goals and priority setting at schools that have fewer meetings versus schools that have more meetings. And if, for example, there were to be a school that decided to defer its meeting until November or December, well past, the bulk of our budgetary cycle has been completed, then we really have to ask whether or not they're having a meaningful role for like participation in the development of the budget, right? And on top of that, it's just bad policy because they've had no meaningful role in the development of the actual, forthcoming budget, but then they're going to be responsible for like substantive engagement in the development of an SIP that's then tied to another cycle that they're kind of out of calendar with and possibly aren't in sync with for the rest of the district, which means that when the materials that they're producing are coming to the school committee, we have no ability to say that Pierce has had the same level of access to, of teacher and parent access to, the SIPs in the budget as like Driscoll, as like Baker, as like Lawrence, et cetera, et cetera. Like it could end up being that Driscoll only met 4 times that year and that those meetings didn't really give the members of that community meaningful opportunity to engage in that kind of, consultation. And Pierce had, 9 meetings and they were intensively engaged. This should not be a matter of prerogative. We should have a clear understanding of what governance is. My understanding was that we literally suspended elections at every single one of our elementary schools because we were going to be trying to open up participation and ensure that elections were going to be happening. What?
So Sharon, just on this, okay, all right. So it's clear that you're not happy with these. That you have some concerns. I'm not exactly sure. So some of the things I'm not sure I would agree. You know, you had concerns about people meeting only 4 times a year, but Ben's procedures don't necessarily say that people have to do that. And how strictly do you want to, you know, you talk about giving them freedom to do things, but then you want to sort of require them to meet every month, which we can do, but it's just a question of how you want to set this up, whether you want to be dictating how the school councils operate or giving them latitude.
Michael, let me jump in there because I agree with what you're saying. There is, you know, there is this real dilemma challenge in Brookline, which is folks often talk about autonomy, about schools doing things, you know, in the way they see it, and that freedom and that responsibility. And then other times the exact opposite happens, where we want to dictate certain things from central office. You know, I mean, people want that to happen. Okay, I try to maintain pretty good balance on this in my approach. So I think you're getting at to 2 core things: is how much leeway do we provide folks? And you know, within some, you know, decent guardrails, I like to provide our schools as much as they can. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to say how many meetings they have, because some schools may want to have more meetings than others. Okay, I think another piece is there's also a fundamental difference here between the way I'm interpreting, our staff is interpreting this language, and the way Dr. Brombitz is. And so, you know, I wanted to just share some of the language here that you know, just that I was looking at, which I should share now. And you should see it highlighted. You know, in decision making, the school councils are, by law, are to assist and make recommendations to the principal. You know, that to me, and then also here on school improvement educational goals, the school's educational goals will be determined by the principal, in consultation with the school council. So our reading of this, and listen, and this is a good thing for the committee to discuss and debate. Our reading of this is that they are advisory, that they're consultative. It's not a shared decision-making body. It isn't a co-equal, you know, management structure. And that is, you know, this language here is, you know, what we use, you know, was in, you know, fundamental in our thinking in terms of making these procedures. So, you know, I'll just pause there, because I think those 2 things, you know, coherence and autonomy of school councils, and to what degree, and certainly they should have, you know, much firmer guidelines and procedures than they have up till now. I agree with that entirely. But then the other fundamental question is just this role of, you know, what is their fundamental role? Is it advisory? Is it to make recommendations? Or is it, you know, co-equal management structure? And I think that's something that the school committee has to wrestle with, and we can continue making, you know, procedures from there.
Other than Sharon and myself, go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I think I'm a bit between the 2 camps I see emerging here. I certainly see your point, Michael and Ben, that this sets sort of the statutory minimum, and by no means is it precluding doing more, and I appreciate that, and I like the flexibility. But at the same time, I also see Sharon's point that sometimes the minimum is not necessarily the ideal, and yes, there is that tension there of how draconian do you want to be in sort of picking the ideal for each school. But I think that there is some wiggle room for us as school committee members to try to decide what we think would be an appropriate minimum standard. So if we feel that 4 is just to use Sharon's example, that meeting 4 times a year is definitely too infrequent, but meeting every month would be far too frequent. There would be the possibility to do an in-between. So I think that as a starting point, this draft is helpful in that it lays out what our minimum requirements are, but we may very well choose that we want to go above the minimum in some areas. And if we decide to do that, we should do so quite consciously. But I don't think that we want to be hands-off and just go along with the minimum under the assumption that others will then take it from there, because they may not. Sometimes, depending on how something is phrased, someone looks at a minimum as as the maximum as well. I know it shouldn't be that way, but we need to be very careful about how it's written and also try to decide for ourselves what we think is appropriate. Just as we see in our federalist system of government in general, where sometimes the state takes the federal guidelines and decides to go beyond them.
Fair. So the procedures for policies are not really within the purview of this. We can provide advice on them, but they're not within our purview to sort of vote on and enact. I think if we want to make changes if we think that if people want to make changes to the policy on school councils, I think we can talk about those changes to the extent that people want to propose them. So if anybody on this committee wants to take a shot at redrafting, and I'm sure actually if you want to redraft Ben, even though it's not within our purview, if anybody wants to take a suggestion at making edits to Ben's procedures, I'm sure he would be willing to review those suggestions.
I'm willing to review, Michael, I'm very willing to review suggestions and input, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I'm not willing to, have votes or, and I'm very concerned when school committee members say, if these procedures aren't up to my approval, then I'll work for the next 2 years to, defeat them and disrupt them. That is very worrisome to me, and I think should be to all school committee members.
Yeah, and I think the way, if there are concerns about, if there are things that we want to see in procedures, quite frankly, out of this body, I think we should put them in policy. We really feel so strongly for them that they must get in there, then we should consider that. So with that said, I'm sure, like you said, Ben, I'm sure, the receiving suggestions on these is fine. If folks want to mark them up, if that's fine, I'm sure Ben will review them. We can talk about them at our next meeting of this subcommittee. If folks want to make suggestions on changes to the policy, they can do that, and we can discuss them as well.
I do have one specific question. So under the school improvement plan items, I noticed that curriculum is never explicitly mentioned. Is that intentional? Now, I understand that the state guidelines do not mention curriculum either, and these 9 factors were essentially lifted directly from the DESE site, and that's fine. But do we want to be explicitly including curriculum as an appropriate discussion? I would think so, because to me, that certainly touches upon a student's school experience.
I think that would, I think that's a fair, go ahead, Ben, I'm sorry. Ben, were you going to say something?
Sorry, I was on mute. You can't see it, Michael, but I'm highlighting the school improvement plans educational goals section of your policy, of the school committee policy, and it says the school's educational goals will be determined by the principal in consultation with the school council. The goals must be consistent with the student performance standards adopted by the Mass Board of Education and consistent with educational policy of the superintendent and school committee of the public schools of Brookline. The school improvement plan shall address goals as articulated by the school committee, the superintendent, and his or her staff. So, I would be concerned. I think our teachers and others may be concerned if the school council, made up of, at least in half by folks who are not educators, are involved in making specific curricular decisions. I think that would be, and there's no area, I don't think, I could be wrong here, but there's no area in the school committee policy where that references that.
Well, I don't think it's decisions. It's consulting the principal, and the principal's making the decisions, and it's very clear that no votes are taking place.
I think there's probably a balance to strike.
Go ahead.
I'm having a hard time visualizing what that would look like. Like, what kind of curriculum input? Can you tell me what you mean by that, or what you envision?
So, for example, with the math program review, there have been some very vocal parents who feel that elements of our math curriculum are not effective and that they need to send their children to Russian math. So being able to have that discussion, I think would be appropriate. So I'm not necessarily saying get into a curriculum discussion to the level of, I don't like this textbook, go with that textbook. But at a more general level, to say that a certain type of curriculum doesn't seem to be working for the student body, consider advocating for another one. I think that would be okay. And it somewhat already fits with number 8, means for meeting the diverse learning needs of as many children as possible. But if the word curriculum is never mentioned at all, I'm a little concerned that that's going to be considered verboten.
I hear you. I guess I'm just thinking in that example, I'm not sure that that would be a school level issue on a like that curriculum would be something that the school council could really have a discussion, but really isn't good. Like, we wouldn't want individual schools necessarily making changes to curriculum at one school, because then you're really not having consistency. I don't know. I mean, this is not fully formed ideas here. I'm trying to understand, what you're thinking, so that, we can make sure that the policy is well balanced. And I think we should be able to have conversations about that, so that we can address concerns. I'm just thinking that some of these conversations are more district level than school level for curriculum, but maybe not. I don't know. I could be.
Well, I'll try to go at this a different way. Let's say that it's social studies, and 2 different schools are learning about American history. And one school enjoys going on field trips to the Freedom Trail in downtown Boston, and another school likes to handle it by putting on plays, whatever it might be. Both schools are still addressing the curriculum goals, but they are tackling them in different ways through different types of learning experiences. And being able to discuss those learning experiences for achieving the curriculum goals, I think, is worthwhile. And we already have some differentiation along those lines in our school buildings anyway.
I also want to just add to that, like, it's not at all clear that we need to have the level of standardization that we already have. I mean, like, if you look over at Cambridge, if you look at a number of other schools in the district, there are schools that make markedly different curriculum priorities on a school by school basis. Some become like language immersion schools. Some become like, certain they decide to prioritize other kinds of things. I'm not saying that, and that may be in part a district level decision, that may in part be a school level decision. There may also just be on a year-to-year basis. If you look at SIPs from comparable districts, schools that are deciding to prioritize STEM for a particular kind of year in order to address a perceived gap, while other schools are choosing to prioritize the arts. Those kinds of decisions do, in fact, need to be made at a school level, because it's the people at the school level who have the best sense of sort of where the aspirations of the school are, what the needs and the demands of the families are and the teachers are, and also like where for whatever reason gaps may have been created in a given year or series of years. So I do think that we need to.
Yes. So that makes a lot of, yes, I understand now. I think that makes a lot of sense. And that was sort of where my thoughts were, as far as schools being able to have a lot of input about what their SIP goals are and what are their goals. If the school really feels that they really need, more work with STEM, or particularly science, or that they want to attack, I don't know, poetry or whatever it is, like that they really want to have an infusion of something or a focus on something. I think that I understand what you're saying now. So that's much clearer to me.
Right. I think there's something to be said for all of this, but at the same time, we don't want to. I think that it's finding the right balance. I don't know if people are saying that they think the school council should be no curriculum should go forward, unless it's approved by the school council. I'm not sure that's what we're saying. But the opportunity for school councils to provide feedback. And for the Curriculum Subcommittee or the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning to differentiate based in part on that feedback, as well as their own professional knowledge, is not inappropriate, or is appropriate. It's hard to. I think the devil's in the details in terms of figuring out what you want to say, or what you want to say the school council's role is.
So was anyone interested in working on this document?
I just want to say, like, I mean, fine, I would be happy to work on the document. I had to turn my attention away for a moment in order to deal with the child. But I want to say that, like, when this came up a couple months ago for us to address, this came up in the context of the question of school council elections. I do not recall that the school committee or the subcommittee charged the superintendent to stop elections at the school council level systematically, at least across through the K-8 levels. I don't know what happened at the BEEP and the high school, but I do know that the superintendent did go to each and every school council and say that essentially nothing was going to be moving forward until there was a process that was going to be determined through consultation with principals, and then principals were telling their populations that they couldn't move forward on school councils without direction from the superintendency. We can move forward with coming up. Excuse me. We moved forward. We can move forward with a multi-year process of revising our procedures around school councils. But the fundamental question remains: when are school councils going to be allowed to have elections? And will those happen in a time frame that will allow for the school committee to provide potentially school councils with professional development prior to the next budgetary cycle, and in order to enable school councils to be ready to go in September in time for the next, school budgetary and SIP cycle? I think that those two questions need to actually be separated from each other, because there is no reason why in the context of the COVID situation, we couldn't have school council elections. School council elections are organized by PTOs and they're conducted over email.
So I won't try to correct the record on much of what Sharon just said. There was one school, but I will correct some of it. There was one school, Coolidge Corner, that was ready to do elections. Others were not anywhere near that, or they'd already done them, or they already had their established membership. I did ask because school committee members, specifically Dr. Bombitz, were advocating for common procedures and clarity for what they were doing. Principals were being targeted by members of school council and others, and who were questioning what they were doing. And so, yes, I asked the principals to pause while we created procedures. I announced that very public in school committee meeting, that we get input from them, input from you. We can get input from school council as well. And I spoke to the principals about that. I did go to one school council meeting, CCS, and they asked me very directly to, and they explained to me where they were in their voting, their election process. And I said, great, thank you. Let me get back to you on that. And fully intended to say, yes, you should, that makes sense. You should go forward. And then all this hit. So, but yeah, we are trying to, and as I've said, and it says in this draft, that election should happen in the spring, and specifically for spring 2020, they should happen in a way that allows for, so folks are ready to go in the fall. So, I don't understand the need to, whatever. But I think that's pretty clear. And so I would appreciate suggestions on the draft. I would not appreciate people redrafting it. As Michael has made it pretty clear, the school committee does not create procedures, but I'm happy to get your input on them, and we'll make adjustments as appropriate. I think there is a fundamental question here about the intent of school councils that the policy subcommittee, at the very least, has to weigh in on, about whether they are advisory and consultative, or whether they are a decision-making body that co-manages the school. And those are two very, very different things. I read, and my staff reads in both the school committee policy and the state regulations, that they are advisory and work in consultation with the principal, but the principal remains the leader and manager of the school building. But I do agree that those are two different interpretations, and different procedures would come out of those two very different interpretations.
So thank you. Why don't we stop there for a moment on this issue? I will just sort of maybe close it out for now, not to say that we're ending the discussion at this body, but maybe it's time to end the discussion for today. But I don't know who here might overlap on curriculum, if anybody.
I do.
So Jennifer, I don't know if you want to, at the next curriculum meeting, let folks know that we are having a conversation about this and some of the issues that are coming up around this, because I do think that as we get into the role of school council, what they should be doing vis-a-vis curriculum, it starts to move further away from, or I don't know if it moves further away from, but it becomes sort of, it envelops that area, right? And I think we need some input or some thoughts from the curriculum subcommittee.
Yes, I think that we are trying to schedule a meeting for this week, but I suspect that will be pretty full meeting. I can bring it up under new business and, talk about school site councils and our conversations here today. I do feel like a lot of this is going to need to come to full school committee. There's a lot of overlap here. I think people are going to weigh in, but
This is a full school committee issue.
I agree. I think it's a full school committee issue, but I am happy to respond to the chair's request to bring it to curriculum. Just mention it to them, let them know, that we had this conversation. As an FYI, I have been trying to put this on the agenda for curriculum as it relates to school improvement plans.
Okay. So at 6:35, we are at the end of our allotted time. I was a little bit late because of my own technical difficulties. We've got a couple things that we did not get to, or we have not gotten to yet. I do not want to go excessively beyond the time that we've allotted. However, if folks wanted to, I would be willing to set up a meeting for next week if we felt that we could do that to maybe tackle some of these other policies that we kind of have before us. The policy on homeless children, policy on students in foster care, namely. There was an item for the military students or students with parents in the military. I think that was inadvertently put on the agenda. We had decided at the prior meeting that we didn't feel we needed a policy on that. So I think it might just be those other two that we need to address. And we could do that next week if folks wanted to.
Michael, just a reminder that the school committee meeting has been changed to Monday. I don't know if that impacts anyone else's scheduling.
No, that's it. Yeah, no, that's a good reminder. So, I could do we have a meeting next Thursday as well? Or is it just next Monday?
There's an interim search committee meeting on the 9th, and there's a curriculum subcommittee meeting this Thursday, the 2nd.
Okay. What about next Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday?
Next Thursday, there's the interim superintendent search committee meeting, which includes half of us.
Okay.
And then Tuesday, Robin would know better if there's anything that I can't see. I'm looking at the public calendar.
So right now, there's a curriculum subcommittee meeting scheduled from 4 to 6, but that's the regular meeting, and I'm not quite sure whether that's still on, given that it will be a meeting at some point this week.
Which day are we talking about, Robin?
That's Tuesday the 7th. So currently a meeting scheduled curriculum 4 to 6, but I'm not entirely sure that will happen.
Okay. Is there anything scheduled currently for the 8th?
There isn't. Passover starts at sundown.
Oh, okay. All right. That's not a good day then. All All right. We had a, let's see.
You want to do it before or after the Thursday interim superintendent meeting, or
What time
another
is that
day?
meeting on the, what time is that meeting on the 2nd and the 9th, or the 9th, I guess?
Meeting is at 5 p.m.
That's a little, I can't do that, unfortunately.
Okay.
I mean, we currently, I think, have something for the 13th, which we could try to keep. I did want to try to, take this opportunity when we're meeting remotely, if we could do more things and meet a little more often. But it looks like at the moment, the next available time would be the 13th, which we could keep, although we could move, it currently scheduled for 6. We could move that back to 5 if that works for people.
Michael, if we are going to be scheduling extra meetings, I would just like to open up the floor to whether or not we need to establish or revise policies regarding students' access to education during extended mandatory school closures. It seems like it's more germane to our current situation. I don't know.
It's no, I understand. I don't. We can certainly work on it. I mean, I don't think that if we work on it, it's something that could get off the ground before the end of this current crisis, hopefully. And I say that hopefully that the crisis will end soon enough, but it's certainly probably something to think about in the event that there's another crisis. I don't know what other policies exist out there along those lines. I suspect there may not be many, although I could be wrong. Sharon, do you want to investigate what's out there or start to think about a framework for what that might look like?
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I do want to say that, though, from a policy perspective, there's been a lot of, I don't know, public deliberation, not us deliberating, but the public deliberating over whether or not we are not able to offer education to students because of equity or because of equity issues. And is it worth our while for the policy subcommittee to make a recommendation on that matter? Because it does actually very much seem like a policy matter. It's a pretty big, I mean, there's a lot of very big claims that are being made that fall in the policy space about why we are or aren't doing things as a district in this current time.
Well, there's certainly no policy that says that. I mean, well, what statement do you think that should be? I guess we're certainly not saying that everything has to. I don't think this subcommittee would say everything has to stop until everything is equity is perfect. Equity issues are handled in an absolute pristinely perfect way. And I'm not sure that's the message that the school committee is putting out there, that Ben is putting out there either. I think some of that has been taken out of context, and that's a personal reflection, not necessarily anything else. I think because people have raised concerns about equity, which I think are valid, people have sort of taken the next step to say, well, the school committee is not acting because of this silly thing called equity. And I think that's maybe a misinterpretation about what's happening. I don't know. So I'm not sure there's a policy that, I'm not so sure that there's a policy issue that the policy subcommittee needs to address on this issue. If you feel that there's a statement that we need to make of some kind and you'd like to draft something for our review, certainly we can review it.
Just from a practical perspective, my concern about tackling that issue now would just be that it seems like curriculum has been taking the lead on it. And if we end up crafting a policy that does not match what curriculum is doing on this very same issue, I think we would at least need to work in concert with curriculum so that our visions are compatible.
Curriculum has been
I think that's a good
assigned, the curriculum has been assigned the lead on this, but to date, curriculum has done nothing on this issue, right? They were going to be holding their first meeting on this issue at 3 p.m. on Thursday, right? And children have been out of school for 3 weeks. Now, I'm happy to comb through our document and figure out whether or not there's language in there that demonstrates that, you know, that seems to be germane to the current situation. But I think that the bigger issue here is that regardless of whether or not these are interpretations or misinterpretations, there are facts on the ground that are being created as a result of the silence that's coming from school committee on this matter. And I don't think we can keep kicking the can down the road. I do think that this is a big picture question. I think that it is a policy level issue, and I think it rises to the level of our attention. So.
Well, like I said, if you want to put a proposal out there and do your research and float something to the subcommittee as an option for moving forward, you know, we will be receptive to reviewing that.
Well, like, let me just ask you guys, because this is the policy subcommittee and the governor has issued essentially an order stating that education must continue in all of the districts in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Do we have any policies or practices that are currently being implemented to not align with that? Because right now we are not aligned with that.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Do we have policies that don't align with the governor's statement?
Yes.
Is that what you?
Do we have any policies that prevent us from going ahead immediately and providing education to children in the district now?
I don't believe so. However, policies isn't the only thing that sort of is at play here. I think to look at just through the lens of policy is, I think there's a lot more going on, but I don't believe that there is a policy that says the PSB shall not provide education to students under certain circumstances.
Are there any unintended consequences from existing policies? I don't know. I'm asking the question. It just baffles me why we seem to be having so many delays moving forward with what is a fairly clear and straightforward directive.
I do not know if there are any conflicts of interest in the policy manual. I've not combed the policy manual for that reason. I can't say. So at the moment, we were talking possibly about a meeting on the 13th. Would folks be amenable to moving that to 5 o'clock? I think we've previously talked about that being at 6 o'clock.
That's fine with me.
I'm just looking at my calendar now. Five o'clock is fine.
Sharon, would that be okay with you? 5 o'clock on the 13th?
Did you say April the 13th?
Yep.
Do you know that that's Easter Monday?
Do you think that's problematic from, I don't know. I mean, it's not a holiday.
Technically, it falls on a holiday. I mean, it falls on a whole week of holidays. I don't know if we're planning on observing our holidays or not.
Is that right? The Monday after Easter is a holiday?
So the 13th through the 17th are all holidays. It is a school closure period.
I think the school closure is the following week.
It's April
Yeah,
12th.
I think vacation week is 20.
It is April 12th through April 18th.
Right.
I have
Wait a
school
minute.
vacation as being the 24th.
What is this? Sorry. Oh no, sorry. That is an order for that is sorry, I apologize. That is a hangover from the bot in the Brookline Commonwealth system that has put Governor Baker's orders on my calendar. Every day is a holiday. My apologies.
All right, so April 13th at 5?
That's fine. Given where we are, is it I'm just thinking ahead. Is it impossible to meet during vacation week, or is it bad as a matter of public policy to try to meet during vacation week? What do we think?
I'm fine with meeting during vacation week. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it.
Well, I'll be around. I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah,
I'm sure this is going to be much of a
Oh, no, I
Yeah,
mean,
I think-
honestly, like my situation, guys, honestly, just is I'm getting slammed with work on COVID. And I'm getting pulled into like meetings at all hours. And so I'm a little bit, I'm going to be a little bit unable to make full commitments. So, sorry.
But I'll throw a proposal out there of April 20th at 5 o'clock as well.
That,
That's not
Right
marriage.
now,
Well, no, like I said,
okay.
no marriage on Monday.
It's fine with me.
Robin, that's still a state holiday though, right?
Yes, it is.
so that
Marathon Monday. Can we meet on a state holiday? We probably can't meet on a state holiday, right?
What holiday
I
is
said
it?
that.
Marathon Monday,
I can check into that.
Patriots Day. Okay.
I can check. Unless you want to pick another date right now.
Well, we could look at Tuesday the 21st at 5 as an alternative. Would that work for folks?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sharon, do you think you can make the 21st at 5 work?
I'm not making any commitments right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's schedule it then. I hope you can make it. If you find out that you definitely cannot make it, Sharon, let me know and maybe we can work around that and try to reschedule. But I'd like to just sort of get it on other people's calendars and hope that you can make it as well.
That
But
seems fine.
we
It's
can
more,
reschedule.
it makes more sense for you guys to go ahead with your planning and for me to try to catch up.
Okay. But like I said, if you find out that definitively that you can't make it and we can reschedule it, we can try and do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Why don't we leave it there for this evening? Thank you, everyone, and I will talk to you soon.
All right.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good night.